The Federal Reserve tells us personal income, the money you earn from your job, investments, unemployment, welfare, whatever you get, was $9.2 trillion in 2003. That was up 88% from 13 years earlier, when personal incomes were only $4.9 trillion. Up sounds good, more income sounds good, 88% in 13 years sounds good, so why am I predicting the economy of the United States will fail, and soon? 2003 was the year we invaded Iraq. Bush decided to fight the war on deficit spending. Because Bush put the country in debt for an expenditure of $8 billion a month, the value of the dollar nosedived 32% on all world markets by 2005. It is now down another 8%, a 40% decline in value in 4 years. In fact, the Japanese, Korean, and Taiwanese banks have saved our hash by buying tons of US dollars. They were desperate to shore up our economy so they could sell us Hyundais, Toyotas, and chrome-plated exercise machines. So they bought US dollars by the truckload so foolish people wouldn't spend and flood the market with them. The true value of that personal income of $9.2 trillion is really only about $6 trillion. Still a nice chunk of change, but 1/3 reduced from the figure released to the public. And note that 41% of that $6 trillion went to only 1% of our population, the wealthiest 3 million Americans. The world gets between 68 and 74% of its crude oil from the Middle East. So any war in the Middle East always drives up the cost of oil. Oil means energy, and energy is consumed in every manufacturing and processing business and in the manufacturing of plastic. As the cost of oil goes up, the price of products increases, and because products need to be shipped by railroad, ship, airline, and by truck, energy is consumed in every operation, from lighting and heating a turkey farm, to drying fruit, to harvesting soybeans and cotton, to refrigerating roses for Valentine's Day. So the rising cost of oil causes the price of food, clothing, tools, and furniture to increase. When prices go up, at a time when the value of the dollar is going down, you can bet we all buy a lot less. So between the rising energy cost of things we buy and the falling value of the dollar, even though all Americans are earning 88% more pieces of green paper than we were in 1990, we're buying a hell of a lot less. Any economist will tell you 67% of the success of an economy is people spending cash to keep business profitable. When people feel poor, they only buy the things they need. Very few businesses are profitable, and the middle class shrinks. So 67% of the success of the economy is consumer spending, and this is especially true in the United States of today, which has become an unbalanced economy. 80% of us are dependent upon service organizations for our income. The service organizations do not have a huge manufacturing base to serve, because due to bad management by both Democrats and Republicans, 60% of our manufacturing sector is no longer with us. They are located in foreign countries. Tens of millions of well-paid manufacturing workers have lost their jobs and are now working for peanuts in the service sector, so they have a lot less to spend. Our 80% service economy serves a manufacturing base, which is only 40% of the manufacturing sector that was here 27 years ago. Service gets its big customers from only 20% of the capitalized business of the United States. So the economy that desperately needs 2/3 of its population to be spending money on bass boats and perfume has shoved 80% of the population into the Home Depots, Walmarts, and McDonald's of America. 80% of U.S. workers are dependent upon service sector jobs or the earnings of a service sector business. But service sector is 67% dependent upon the underpaid consumers who are not making any money in service sector jobs. As a result, salaries in the service sector have been sliding down the slippery slope for many years because the service sector does not have the big industrial customers and does not have a big population of well-paid workers to serve the 80% of Americans who invest in, manage, and work for. Service sector companies must scratch and claw for a drastically reduced market share. This could be why the numbers of people who should be working in the country don't respond to income tax filings. We have 75 million adult unmarried men and 75 adult unmarried women. That's 150 million. And then we have 26 million married couples. So at a minimum, that's 176 million income tax filings the IRS should be receiving every year. But they don't get that, do they? The IRS gets more like 115 or 116 million income tax filings every year. Difference between 116 and 176 is about 60 million tax filings not being filed. According to laws passed largely by Ronald Reagan in the 80s, every high school kid with a Mac job, every little old lady with a Social Security check, and every recipient of state welfare or dividends from stock or unemployment or sale of a mutual fund, all these people technically should be paying taxes. Only they're not paying taxes, and the taxes are incredibly low these days. Now, we know Republicans love money because they all took money from Jack Abramoff. So why would they want to lower taxes? For a long time, I thought they were sabotaging the Democrats. Republicans would engage in deficit spending, lower taxes, get the country into massive debt, and refuse to cooperate when the Democrat tried to pay off the deficit. That would keep the Democrats and the government impoverished and make life difficult. It's just too bad no Democrat ever had the brains to notice and use that in his campaign advertising. So let's look at that 60 million tax returns. We can eliminate 9 million. That's the 3% of Americans who are usually in prison most of the time. So we're down to 51 missing tax returns. Now let's look at the illegal aliens. Democrats tell us there are only 12 million illegals in the country, but let's assume a more realistic figure, remembering that Chinese gangs have been smuggling Chinese slaves into California, Oregon, and Washington for 20 years. Let's say there are 20 million illegal aliens. They don't have Social Security numbers, so why would they file a tax return? So that brings us down to 31 million tax returns not being received every year. 31 million. That's over 10% of Americans. Could it be possible that 10% of Americans might know enough about business and manufacturing and bad leadership and bad government that they view with contempt all the propaganda of today and simply make their money the old-fashioned way? Let's see. How could they do it? Well, they could struggle along in the barter economy, keeping a low profile, working under the table as the aliens do, taking payments in cash only. You can't get rich doing that, but you might eke out a simple life. Or someone who's more ambitious might decide to sell drugs. Gee, I wonder if there's a market for drugs in a country where 80% of the working people are in debt, depressed, and underpaid. And then there are those who lose their jobs and become desperate. Some commit suicide by cop. They go back into the workplace and shoot the guy who fired them. But here's a sign that hope springs eternal in the human beast. Most of them demonstrate their desire to live by stealing a gun and going into the armed robbery business. This is a growth industry, the FBI says. While all other crimes have fluctuated only 2 or 3% up or down, armed robbery is up more than 10% across the country for the last 2 years. 10% a year. So when we narrow our focus on the missing 60 million tax returns, we find 9 million people in prison, 20 million illegal aliens, and 31 million others, some of whom are working under the table, and some of whom are dealing drugs or engaging in armed robbery. Figure it out, Mr. and Mrs. America. Is this a country managed wisely and well since 1980? My name is Quixote. The answer is no.